You are listening to the Cookbook Love Podcast with Maggie Green, episode number 358.
Welcome to the Cookbook Love Podcast, a podcast that celebrates cookbook readers, buyers, collectors, writers, and clubs. And now your host, cookbook author, culinary dietitian, and cookbook writing coach, Maggie Green.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Cookbook Love Podcast. How's everybody doing today? As always, hope you're doing well. And here we are in the middle of July. I hope you are having a great summer. We are working our way through cookbook camp, and it has been so much fun to meet many of you who are in cookbook camp that listen to the podcast. Brings me a lot of joy to know that we are connecting here and that you are really taking the time to listen to your desires, invest in yourself, and work together to get your cookbook not only written, but published. I'm headed to the beach in a few weeks, and that makes me think about, of course, working ahead a little bit here, what's going to be happening when I get back from the beach. And that will be in August, and it's going to be time to start thinking about opening the doors to cookbooks on KDP. So I wanted to mention that today because in September, we'll start Cookbooks on KDP, and that is the program where I teach cooks, bakers, food and culinary professionals how to publish their own recipes in a book on Amazon. It's a great program, lasts anywhere from around 12 weeks, where we have time to learn how to create the interiors for our books, the book cover for our book, and we use Amazon to publish the book. Many of my students also publish on Ingram Spark so that they can have their books listed in a catalog for purchase from bookstores in their area. So this is truly a way for you to not only write your own cookbook, but be a self-publisher. So if you are interested in learning more about cookbooks on KDP, in addition to what we're going to talk about here on the podcast, head on over to www.cookbookwritersacademy.com/KDP, and you can get on the wait list so that when the doors open, you will learn and hear more about it. It's always good to be on the wait list because sometimes I open the doors early, and there are additional bonuses for people who are on the wait list. So just be sure to get on the wait list. Let's invest in yourself. Let's get those recipes, stories published in a book before the end of the year. It's totally possible. And the way you can prepare for this now is by starting to think about the recipes you would want to include and starting to make sure that they're ready to be formatted, and we'll get them published. Okay, so today on the episode, I have a conversation with Suzanne Lenzer. Suzanne is a food stylist, author, and writer. We're going to talk about her third book, which is Peckish, Suggestions for the Sophisticated Snacker. Suzanne has very interesting philosophies about eating. We've been taught how to eat, and as a dietitian, I said to her, often we think about a plate with our protein, our carbohydrate, our fruits, our vegetables. But she talks about a really fun way today to think about eating with a philosophy of mindful snacking at home. She shares this approach to mindful snacking and home cooking with a little planning and talks about how she organized her book Peckish by vessels, such as on toast, in jars, or napkins only. Suzanne and I also talk about the online phenomenon of girl dinner and her ritual of shower wine. So without any further delay, let's dive into this interview with Suzanne Lenzer. Hi, Suzanne. Welcome to the Cookbook Love Podcast.
Hi, thank you so much, Maggie. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, excited that you're here to talk about your beautiful new book, Peckish. But before we get started, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about who you are and what you do?
I am a food stylist and cookbook author. So I do both. I kind of wear two hats, so to speak. And I got my culinary career started working with Mark Bittman, former New York Times columnist and author of the How to Cook Everything series, working with him both on development, but also as his stylist for his minimalist videos at the Times. And then that evolved into my styling career. And then I collaborated on a few books with other chefs over the years, and then took on my own writing. And Peckish is my third cookbook, following on the heels of Graze, my last one.
And Graze and what was the name of the first one?
The first one was Truly Madly Pizza. It was based on a pizza crust a recipe I'd been developing for 20 some odd years and working on it. It was a bunch of toppings and a single crust. And then Graze is really the start of this small plates snacking thing that I'm into now.
Yeah. And then Peckish, of course, is the third one, which we're going to talk a little bit about a couple of these today because of the concept of this small plate and the style of eating. And I think probably let's start and just dive in with this topic, because there has been a change, I think, in the way that we are eating and in the way that your books advocate eating. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your philosophy about this that led to Peckish?
Well, to be honest, I think it's a very the traditional way of eating for many cultures is this idea of smaller plates, smaller, bits and pieces, lots of flavors all put together. But I think that, we're all largely trained to meat and 3 veg or 2 veg or, a big bowl of pasta. And I find and have found over the last, I'd say, 10, 15 years, people really love this idea of small plates and snacking. And I think, Graze, my previous book, was maybe, early on that. And Peckish might even be kind of a little late. I think it's become quite a thing now. But, when I think about snacking, or when I think people think about snacking, they think of a bag of chips, an energy bar. And I think it's really more about, when you go to a restaurant, you want to order lots of little plates, right? I mean, I do. I want to order lots of appetizers and I want to share everything and taste everything. And that's really the philosophy that, as a home cook, you don't have to save those experiences, those kind of wonderful communal food experiences for eating out. You can do that at home. You can, and it's not hard. It's hardly harder than, in my mind, a well-curated board or platter, frankly.
Yeah. And I think, the funny thing is when you started to say this, my background is my college degree was in food and nutrition, registered as a dietitian. And I automatically think about this whole concept of like the plate and the vegetables. And like you said, like the making sure everything is on the plate and then raising my family. That's the way that we ate for dinner. Not the Peckish style or the grazing style necessarily, but when we did, it was usually on a special occasion, like Super Bowl, like, okay, we're just going to get a bunch of appetizers there, but they always loved it. But I wonder for feeding a family, like I'm thinking about them now, how that would have worked out, because I used to sometimes try to serve like a sandwich or a bowl of soup and they look at me like, what in the world is going on here? Have you lost your mind? Whereas a cook, it was like so relieving and fun to finally cook that way. And so I still tease them to this day. Like if I pureed a soup and made a sandwich, they'd be like, you got to be kidding me.
Well, I think I totally get it with a family. That actually does make sense. And in fairness, perhaps what I'm advocating for isn't perfect for like every night dinner.
Yeah, but the funny thing is they loved when I actually deviated from it, and there was more of, I guess it was more of a volume play too. They actually really enjoyed it because it felt a little bit more like freedom to them, I think.
Well, I think that is something I really do hit on in the book that I think is so important about this idea. It's liberating. I mean, yes. I personally find the whole idea of eating this way and cooking this way, and obviously I'm a cook, it's very freeing. It gives you sort of permission to be bold in the kitchen. You don't have to follow so many rules. You don't have to think, will this go with that? What if it doesn't? What if it's, cold and hot at the same time? It doesn't, you just can let go of some of that, I think, baggage and some of that pressure, frankly. And I want to just point out that I think it can be very healthy too. You said Super Bowl. Certainly there's a place for that kind of thing, but the food that I, have in the book and that I personally cook, it really is, it's quite simple as a rule, but it's also, it's all whole grains, whole vegetables, it's minimal meat. It's just not it's not the processed,
correct, 100%,
five ingredient, 5-minute thing at all.
Yeah, they're definitely, by looking through the book, people, you can definitely tell that. So let's talk about, I want to talk about both books, Graze and Peckish, because they're similar but different. And I think everybody's going to enjoy hearing about how you kind of led into this concept, and then what happened when you wrote Peckish. So let's start with Graze. This was kind of like the starting point for this philosophy and the way that you were focusing on small plates. Tell us about Graze. That was your second book.
Yeah, Graze came about largely because my husband and I took a trip to Spain way back, and we were in southern Spain, and we really ate only tapas for the entire trip. We just fell head over heels in love with this idea of we could go out and get, 3, 4 little tiny things. I mean, I can tell you what we ate the first meal. Like, it's still so like alive in my brain. But that's how Graze started to come together for me in my head. I kept thinking, no one at home really, the restaurants weren't quite doing it yet. It wasn't as big a deal as it is now. And I started feeling like this is kind of a thing, and I want to be able to cook this way. And I think other people will too. It also was on the sort of beginning of the whole boards thing. Boards weren't big. We didn't have Instagram yet. Really, if we did, it was barely a thing. So I think one thing that the book Graze is broken up by effort, which I thought was kind of interesting. It's, shopping only, a bit of chopping, worth the effort. So it takes you through the cooking. You can pick much you want to cook, how hard you want to cook based on, the effort and time you have to put in. So in some ways, I think Graze got pigeonholed as a board book because the cover is a pretty board, I think.
Yeah.
And it had these simpler upfront ideas in it. So Peckish came about because I realized there's so much more to this kind of eating than boards and platters that people may not realize. You don't have to think about these highly curated, clustered, Instagram worthy, boards to have a fabulous snacking spread. And so the way that my theory for the book started working was like, how else do you break this up? Well, by vessel. So you have in bowls, on toast, napkins only, platters, and it gives you a way of building these feasts, if you will, or meals, big or small, but thinking about them differently. What goes in jars, what goes in bowls, and then putting those things out together makes your table so much more interesting too. Forgetting the flavors alone, it's just a much more, I think, dimensional way to eat.
Yeah, because when you think about what maybe needs to be on the table or what you would like to have on the table, and then you think about the vessel it would be in, that's how your book is organized then, from the vessel into the recipes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I do think those vessels, you don't have to adhere to them strictly. I mean, I give you jars and bowls and things because that's how they broke up for me. But there is a lot of mix and match can happen between them. So the recipes themselves, I think stand alone.
Yeah. One of the things I often tell people that I work with who are writing cookbooks, and that they can really make the table of contents their own. It can reflect what's in the book. And your two books are such a perfect example of that. That Graze was organized by the amount of effort you want to put into cooking. People will be like, wait a minute, doesn't it have to be like, organized like a meal? And the answer is like, no, you did such a great job with that. How did you get the ideas to organize your books this way?
I'll be really honest. Graze was sort of an accident. We were actually doing, I'm just full transparency. It had been organized differently. We were doing the photo shoot, and we had all the, when you're doing a photo shoot, you have the little, what they're called Polaroids. They're not really Polaroids anymore, but they look like little Polaroids. You put them all up on the wall to see how everything is living together in chapters. And as we were seeing, this is my art director and I, as we were seeing how it was all coming together, we started to see this pattern that wasn't in the original organization, which was, this is like a beautiful crudité. This is just, marinated beans. This is just an antipasti. And those are all so simple. You only have to shop really to do those. Well, those should be clustered together, not by food, but by how they get made. And then, some of the more intensive cooking, it was like, well, not everyone's going to make a pot of cassoulet or, batch of biscuits. Those are harder. Let's let people decide, since this is supposed to be this kind of snacking eating, let's let them understand what they're in for. So it was a very organic way of coming together. Peckish, on the other hand, was sort of like I said, it was kind of walking back this idea of boards and platters and saying, look, there's another way to think about food. It doesn't matter how much effort goes into it. It's more about how you serve it and how you preserve it, if you will.
Yeah, that's neat. And it's kind of, it's a great way to think about organizing the book, like from a high level, and actually thinking about, something that's a little bit more out of the ordinary, and thinking about your book in that way and how table of contents for your books can really introduce people to the whole concept of effort you invest in eating versus the vessel that you use in these two different books that you've created. So let's talk about the effect that Instagram has had or social media has had on the way that we eat.
It's had a lot.
Yeah. So, and it seems to me, so Graze, you said, was written though prior to that, or was it a response to that?
I think, forgive me, if Graze came out, I think in 2017. So Instagram existed. I don't think it was what it, at least in my world, it wasn't what it is now. Peckish has obviously come out very recently, and it's, girl dinner is a phenomenon that I know it's been.
Let's talk about what is girl dinner? It's interesting you said, Giada said about your book, you've done girl dinner one better. Can you elaborate on what Giada meant?
Well, first I should say I'm incredibly flattered that Giada said anything about my book, but what I think what she meant was there is this phenomenon, this TikTok, I think it's a TikTok phenomenon, girl dinner that took traction a year or two ago, where women, I'll say, were posting what they eat, what their plates look like. I have some problems with the idea of girl dinner just off the bat, in that I feel like, this is a way of eating that's very traditional. It harkens back to cultures far, far beyond ours. At tapas, antipasti, aperitivo. I mean, this is not a new phenomenon by any stretch. It also, the idea, frankly, of girl dinner is a little bit alienating. I mean, this is people dinner. This is how people choose to eat. So I think the nomenclature has probably is a little unfortunate. Having said all that, the idea that I do like, the nugget in girl dinner that I think is really quite interesting, is this idea of what we eat when we're alone. And I think I'm actually not on TikTok, but I think that was part of the whole trendy thing, which was, this is what I eat when I'm at home watching TV after work by myself. I make this little plate of, pretty things, and this is my dinner. And I love the idea that we're celebrating eating alone, because I do think that's something, and cookbooks, arguably, I think are usually intended for communal eating. I mean, you pull out your cookbooks, I think, when you're going to cook for other people, whether it's one person or friends or parties or whatever. And so the notion that Peckish specifically, but this kind of eating embraces eating by yourself and the empowerment that comes with treating yourself well and taking the time to cook for yourself properly. I think that's a really good one, a really nice thought. And so I do talk about that a little bit in the book. I have a meal that I eat whenever I am alone. I sort of have things I go to that, there's something really nice about not having to ask anybody else what they want on the plate, you know.
And you can just serve yourself whatever you want.
Exactly.
Yeah. So in Peckish, in Peckish, in this whole organization by vessel, I thought that we might talk a little bit about some of the things that are in the book, some of the things that people might find when they dive into recipes that you actually created for the book. And the section that I wanted to talk a little bit about, if you're open to it, is talk about Napkins Only. And then let's talk about the skewers and sticks chapter.
Sure.
So tell us about the chapter that's called Napkins Only.
The idea here really is there's stuff that there are foods you eat with your fingers that are fantastic. And they don't have to be saved for past appetizers at a big cocktail party. They're the kind of thing that you can just indulge in and make, and, whenever you want, really. And, not everything fits in a vessel, frankly. You don't need a plate or a platter or a bowl or a jar for everything. So that's where Napkins Only came from. And I also, there's something really fun about eating with your hands. I mean, it's a very sensual aspect of eating, whether you're feeding yourself or someone else. There's something about that very tactile experience. I think it adds another layer to the food experience. And I mean, you just think the range is kind of incredible too. I mean, whether it's, tacos, French fries, whatever, there are these foods that we innately think of as finger food. And I wanted to make sure that was included in here, since it sort of does fall under the sort of snacking idea.
Yeah. One of the recipes that caught my eye was making tater tots. There's a hotel in the town near where I live, and it's a boutique hotel, and you can go in there and get a drink. And one of the things they have on their appetizer menu is making your own tater tots. And I've often wondered like how they did it. And so it's interesting when I opened up the chapter here, one of the recipes is tater tots with creme fraiche and caviar. What a great combination. Tell us a little bit about that recipe.
Well, that recipe, I'm not to brag, but I'm really proud of that recipe because it took a lot of work.
Yeah.
It's I understanding how to get something that has the texture of a tater tot, the consistency, and that outside crunch took me quite a while to figure out. It's a 2-potato, 2-technique effort. So it isn't for the faint of heart. You do have to do a little cooking, but it is, baking one potato, boiling another one to the right place, cutting one way, grating one way, and then mashing them together with a little bit of potato starch. And it's really actually quite simple, but it takes a little bit of time. But the idea that you can make something people think of buying in a bag, and I think would universally say is not healthy for you and is sort of a decadent, treat at home and make it relatively healthy and much more delicious is just, that's what I was going for. Yeah. And then to elevate it, that sort of, I guess it's that high-low thing, elevate it with caviar and creme fraiche or salmon roe and creme fraiche. You obviously don't have to do that part. It's completely fine as a side dish or with ketchup and, but there's something fun, I think, about making it a little bit unique that way.
Oh yeah. So, I would think if you're going to go, take the time to make the tater tots, I think serving it with creme fraiche and caviar makes perfect sense. And it's a combination, that trio of, a salty potato, the creme fraiche, the caviar. I've even heard someone say that it's kind of a funny story. She said on New Year's Eve, that's her favorite thing is to have some really good champagne with good potato chips is what she uses, and caviar and then creme fraiche.
It's delicious. And the other thing I just will add really quickly about that recipe, because I just made it sound really difficult and it isn't. But what's cool about it, there are a few recipes in the book that are like this. It's intended to be made ahead. And frozen. Yeah. So you can put them straight out of the freezer into the oil too, which I think is kind of a great trick because you can spend the hour making them, put them in the freezer, and then you have them whenever you want to pull some out. You get the hot oil going and you drop them in and they're fresh as though you just made them. And so a lot of the book does have things like that in it too, where you're not starting, to make them at 4:00 when your guests are coming at 6. You can make them 2 weeks, 3 weeks ahead of time.
Yeah, I think that sounds great. Let's see what else. There was something else. The quichettes were in this chapter also with the leek and carbonara. And I loved how you called them quichettes. I thought that was very clever, and they're smaller. Looks like something obviously that's more a finger style food. Anything particular stand out about that recipe?
That one's special to me because it's two of my favorite things. It's carbonara, which is, that totally delectable combination of, of salty pork and cheese and pepper, and the pasta. And then it's like almost like a quiche, a leek quiche, which also has the crust and the cheeses and the onions. And somehow when you marry them, it seems like intuitively too much starch, like crust and pasta. But when they get together, there's something that is just ultimate comfort food to me about that. It just hits all the right notes, and they're cute. They're pretty. The spaghetti on top has a little swirl in it. And I just think it's very unexpected. And again, a little bit of work, but you get a lot of them, and you can cut them up and serve them as quarters, or you can have them whole with a little bit of greens as a full snacking meal. So it's one of the ones that too, I feel like that something I hadn't seen done before that I was trying to really hard to do with Peckish was find some interesting twists on things. Yeah.
And I think that's one of the nice things about new cookbooks, listening to cookbook authors talk about them, is discovering new things and new ways to cook things. And I think that both of those sound unique and very delicious. All right. There's also a chapter on skewers and sticks. Let's talk about that.
That one, I won't say it's silly, but it was definitely a way to include some really easy recipes in this book that people could toss together, but make them different. The idea really came from, as I was saying earlier, I'm a little bit, pun intended, bored with boards. And I think they've been there. Look, I love a good board as much as anybody, but I feel like they've been done. So the skewers and sticks chapter gave me an opportunity to play with the same kind of ingredients, but in a new way of delivering them. And one of my favorite ones in the chapter, actually one I've been making a lot, for friends and also for some tastings are the antipasti ones, because it's basically an antipasti platter, but miniature little skewers. So everybody gets their own little bit of things mixed up. And so, you have a little ball of mozzarella, you have little bit of toasted bread on either side. You have different salumis, you have, prosciuttos, you've got marinated artichokes or pepperoncini, olives, and you can just play with these combinations, and each skewer can be a little different. They take minutes to pull together. And there's just something that people's kind of eyes light up, I think, when you put them out in front of them, because it's a different way of serving the same stuff we're used to getting. But that's just kind of enough to make it new.
Yeah, I think this one definitely, it looks like everything could probably be, you could buy, I love the bread on it. The bread you could buy, prosciutto, marinated artichokes, the mozzarella, the small one, the small balls, cherry tomatoes, all of it looks like you could just buy everything and put them on the skewer.
You could cheat this one completely. If you don't want to marinate your own marinated artichoke hearts, you can totally cheat.
Yeah, this looks great. All right. What else do you serve on a stick or a skewer?
The other ones in there that there's some classic combinations that I play with. There are the melon and cured meat combinations, which I think are fun. And again, just a different way of serving something that we're sort of used to, but it adds an element of inspiration to it, I think. There's a meatball in there that is really quite something. It's a porchetta meatball. And I say that it sounds a little bit braggy, but again, that one took some work to get that flavor profile to really right. But it has the same flavor profile of a traditional porchetta, the rosemary, the garlic, the fennel. There's a little bit of bacon for some smokiness in there. And again, it's just, meatballs to me can be very disappointing. Too much bread, crumbs, just not enough flavor. And these are really, I think, quite intense and quite rich. And you can serve these on a stick or with a toothpick, and they're fun.
Yeah. Sounds like they really are. All right, your turn. What else do you think in the book you would like to talk about or tell people about related to the chapters, or some feature in the book that you feel like is particularly useful?
Well, I guess something I think is really useful isn't actually a specific recipe. There's a section up front where I talk about tricks and tips and tricks kind of for the snacking table. And this is more kind of just, back pocket guidance on how to do this without, if you don't want to dive into these recipes. And I realize that, I love to cook, you love to cook, but not everybody always wants to cook, and they still want this kind of experience. So there's a few things I talk about that I think anyone can implement. One is I call the scattered platter. And this is kind of arguably girl dinner, meaning it's a plate. It's what you put on it that you have in the fridge that you love. And what I talk about in this section that to me makes this special is it's pulling out whatever you have. If it's a soft boiled egg and a bit of pate or a couple pickles or a fresh radish or fennel or some crackers, whatever you have that you want to eat. But instead of reserving it just for you, I love the idea that this is something you'd serve to guests, because as soon as you do that, people think, oh no, it's guests. I have to do something special. I have to cook. I have to buy all these fancy things. The scattered platter to me has this element of intimacy. It's like your company, but you're not, fancy. I'm not treating you different. I don't want you to feel awkward. I'm so comfortable with you that you're going to get what I get. And I sort of think there's something really special about that. I love going to a friend's house and I have some friends who are amazing cooks, obviously, and tend to have things in their fridge that are delicious. But anybody, you go to their house and they pull some stuff out that they're comfortable serving for themselves. There's a level of intimacy that I think is nice with that. So that's one thing that I try to tell people. Don't be fearful of doing that. Feel okay. Just, serving other people you care about what you like to eat.
Yeah. Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah. What else?
Another one's a bread and spread affair. And this one is dear to my heart because I love bread. I often start a meal thinking about bread first because it's got such a gravitational pull that attracts other flavors. You can do so much with different breads. But with this idea, I put out a good loaf of bread. I happen to bake my own bread, but you don't have to, obviously, buy good quality bread. And then I serve it with 2 or 3 different spreads just for dipping and smearing. And the variation in those different flavors is diverse as you want. And I think people love it. It's just sitting down to a meal and just being like, oh, we're all going to do this with our fingers. And it's just going to be delicious, soft things. There's a couple spreads in the book. There's a prosciutto butter, which is ridiculously simple. It's prosciutto and butter. It turns into a compound butter that just tastes like prosciutto. There's a broccoli rabe and pistachio with ricotta spread. There's a basara, which is a fava bean, Egyptian fava bean spread. There's a bunch of different dips and spreads in the books, and any of these put together with some bread and a couple bowls of it. And of course, you could go to the market and buy your spreads. I highly encourage people to take the 15 minutes and a food processor and blitz up some beans or some artichokes and olives and make their own. But that's a neat trick, a nifty trick, I think, too, for pulling things together very quickly and easily.
One of the spreads that I saw that looked really good was the potted salmon spread. It's a combination of using both smoked and fresh salmon.
And that's very easy. It really is. All you do is poach that little bit of salmon, and then the rest of it is just a matter of chopping and getting it together in a jar. There's also, since we're talking about some of the jarred ones, there's a forest floor pate, which is a mushroom pate that is really quite easy. It takes a little bit of cooking. You just have to cook off the mushrooms, and then it's a blitz up in the food processor, and it's a really earthy, rich, wonderful with shallot and thyme sort of autumnal, although you could obviously serve it any time of the year, spread too. So,
and you call that section the jars because it's things that you would actually make in the processor or cook and have ready, and keep it in jars in your refrigerator so that you can pull it out and serve it when it's time to eat.
Exactly. Or whenever. I mean, there's a marinated bean one. I mean, you can keep it in there, throw it on salads, snack on it, throw it on top of a pizza, a lot of that stuff. And then, the pâtés and spreads are meant to you have them on hand. They don't last forever, but they last long enough so that if you make them on the weekend, you're still going to be able to, pull one out on Thursday, Friday evening for, appetizer hour, happy hour.
Right. One of the things you talk about is the difference between serving bread and then also having things served on toast. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. What I mean with that, with the toast chapter, there's a chapter on toast. And in that chapter, I'm using the toast as the vessel. So that really is, I suppose arguably you could call that napkins only as well, but that is starting your creative process, if you will, of your meal, your dish, with the base, and then building on top of that. So that's the difference. The bread and spread affair to me is a much more seat of the pants, put bread out to dip and tear off a hunk and that kind of thing. But the toast is different. To me, the toast really, the toppings that go on a toast need to accentuate and add to the flavor of the whole piece. It's more thoughtful in that sense. And there's some toasts in there that, some take a little bit of work. There's a lobster, buttered lobster on brioche that doesn't take much work at all. You have to buy the lobster and you have to, cook a lobster, or part of a lobster. But there's some that are more highbrow, and then there's some that are really, really easy and really just, smashing up smashed up fava beans and zucchini with lemon and, and that's quite delicious and fresh and super easy too. So there's a range.
Yeah. And I always think that for toast, though, I went to a party once, and wherever they had whatever bread they chose for the toast, it wasn't the right kind of bread. Like it was too chewy or too tough. So in your chapter on toast, you mentioned brioche, but what other kinds of breads do you think make the best toast for an application like that?
I am very loyal. So I make my own sourdough my starter's about 15 years old now, I think, and from Tartine's original recipe. And I make an all white and a 90%, white, 10% wheat. I think the classic one. I think those rustic loaves are arguably, you cannot lose with those. I mean, you could put the lobster on those and it would be great. I chose the brioche on that one. The brioche is in a banh mi, but I think you want a sturdy bread. Like you said, you want something with some tug. I have strong feelings about bread. I think you can judge a restaurant by its bread basket. I mean, I think really, really fast when you go into a restaurant if it's got a great bread basket, if you're going to eat well or you're going to be really sad. And I think it goes for the home cook too. You need to, if you're not going to make your own bread, and I know not everybody wants to, you do need to buy good quality bread. And I think for these kind of toasts, usually you want something with a nice toothsome tug. You want a nice, festooned with flowers, always nice. Baguette, obviously a good baguette, any of those kind of things. But I know exactly what you're talking about when you get served sort of like what could be a beautiful topping.
And this one wasn't that it was too floppy or flexible. It was that I thought the tug was too much. Like it was too hard to bite. Like it was almost like too rustic or too crusty or something. So I think there has to probably be a balance between the sturdiness and the tug, and people able to, like, pick it up and bite it and eat it um, easily. And
Yeah.
and brioche, of course, lends itself to that too. It's a sturdy bread. Probably not as much tug as the sourdough would have, but I think it's probably just important to know the bread and make sure that you feel like you could even test it. You could toast it and see if especially if it's a party, I think.
Oh, totally. Yeah,
If
you'd want
people
to.
are able to pick it up and like bite it off easily and eat it.
No, I think you're totally right. And I think I was going to throw in that ciabatta is another one. Baguette, ciabatta, boule, all those breads. And you're right. Too tough is no good. But I think generally speaking, if you're buying good quality, low ingredient, flour, water, salt sort of thing, you'll probably do okay. And there's so much good bread out there now too. It's gotten, I think the bread game has been upped incredibly. So.
Yeah, if people don't bake their own bread, you definitely can find a lot of really good bread. And, farmers markets are great places these days to pick up loaves of bread. If, I see it all the time, and a lot of really great bread. So definitely a good chapter for the toast. All right. As we're wrapping up our discussion about the book specifically, anything else that you think that you'd like for our listeners to know? Because I want to talk also about food styling.
No, I think I'm good. We can jump into food styling.
Yeah,
and fun.
And you said that you kind of learned about food styling like through experience, through like getting kind of put into a situation where you got to exercise these muscles and learn as you go. Tell us a little bit about what food styling is and the kinds of places that the food is probably styled. Cookbooks obviously might be one place, but what kinds of places do food stylists work?
Food stylists work these days everywhere. I mean, anywhere you see food content, some of them are, I would say, more professional in that they're doing just the food styling like I do. There's a prop stylist, there's a food stylist, there's a photographer, there's like the whole crew when you're doing a cookbook or an editorial shoot or a commercial shoot. Obviously now with how much content's being produced, there are also, like bloggers and whatnot who do it all themselves, and they are food styling. They're styling the food. What I do is more in the line of a traditional, food stylist, meaning that is all I do. I do the culinary production. So from the beginning of whether it's a cookbook or a commercial shoot, what are we trying to make? What does it need to look like? What do I have to buy to do it? Making things ahead of time that can't be made on set, doing all the shopping, showing up on set, doing all the cooking, and getting all the food on set, the way it needs to look. So that's really, a food stylist is the cook behind all of that. And it differs vastly between different media, frankly. So cookbooks are very different than commercial. When you're doing commercial food styling, you're working for a client who obviously wants their product or to be very specific. And that's very different curriculum than doing a cookbook or editorial work where you're really working on recipes and you want the food to look as delicious as it possibly can. And obviously reflect the recipe itself too. I mean, the recipe has to work. And that's, that if it doesn't work, the food stylist gets to figure out how to make it look like it worked. And then the recipe developer has to back into making it work. But that is the job of the food stylist, to make the food look like it should. And I started, as you mentioned, I came into it somewhat differently. My pedigree is a little bit less conventional in that I started working for Mark Bittman, as I mentioned, and doing the food styling for his minimalist column for the Times. And in that capacity, we did everything for real. I mean, there's no oiling things up or adding things to make them look fluffier than they need to. So I came at it from that very realistic approach, which I love, and naturalistic. And it suits my style. I think it is my style. Some people do very wild, wonderful things. They make, they can create things out of Jell-O and stuff that is just not my bailiwick, to be honest. And I think you find your path in food styling that really suits you. And mine is definitely more the cookbook naturalist approach. Yeah.
And when you worked on your own books, you're able to integrate that. Tell us what it was like to do the styling for Peckish.
The thing with my books, and since podcast is a lot about cookbooks and writing them, one thing to mention is, the budgets on cookbooks tend to be quite constrained. And all three of my cookbooks have been shot in my homes. This one most recently in my current home. And one thing I really wanted to do with Peckish style wise, the food is quite spare, I would say. I'm, I think food styling has evolved to be very, very extravagant sometimes. There are these, like, sometimes I almost feel like the ingredients and the beautiful things around the dishes are almost as more involved than the food itself. There's so much styling going on. And I really wanted the food to stand out in Peckish for itself. So it's a very spare, quiet book, I think. We worked hard to do that. Your natural instinct is always throw in one more thing. And my prop stylist was great. She kept saying, the Coco Chanel thing, one less thing makes it prettier. So we'd get it done and then we'd pull one thing out to make it even more spare. But what's interesting is, since it's shot at my house, and I'm actually a big gardener as well, I really wanted it to reflect a sense of place. And largely because I think that this kind of food evokes, and I'm sort of over this word, but a vibe. I feel like there is a vibe you get from a cookbook that makes you want to be there or walk into that room and eat that food. And so what I tried to do a lot, or what we tried to do with this book, was really kind of bring you into my environment, not with me in it. You can put, anyone could be here, but the food is quite simply presented, but in a way I think that lets you know it's an inviting place to be. I hope that's what people think, at least.
Yeah. And I definitely, when I am sent cookbooks, I look through them and think about the book, think about the author, and your book did have a vibe. I feel that with some books more than others, and some I don't really feel a vibe at all, but I think the vibe for me as a cookbook writer, author, talking to people who write cookbooks, it is so important, because to me, that's the personal part of the book. And it's amazing that you can get that vibe without even cooking out of it.
That was the goal. The goal was really,
just by how it looks. Right. Yeah. Totally. I mean, there's no doubt about it. The gardening pictures, the woodwork in the home, the different kinds of props, the silverware, the dishes, the platters. It's beautiful. And I think that it worked for me. And I'm sure that other people that see the book would also feel the same, because it's not just like shots of only the food. Talk about some of the things that you added to the photos, since people can't see it here while we're talking, that you really felt like were personal to you, that you wanted to use in these photos.
Well, I think that's one thing that, again, being a stylist, when I cook for anybody, I'm fully that my collection of stuff is eccentric and mishmashy. And I mean, I still have dishes I bought at a flea market when I was in college in California. I have things my mom's given me. I have bits and pieces that, my husband and I have picked up on travels. Nothing really matches at all. I mean, I am sort of notorious for using soup bowls for, dips and stuff, because I don't ever seem to have the right size bowl for what I need. But having said that, I'm a really big believer in that's what makes your table yours. And with the book, that's kind of what I wanted to do. I mean, I wanted it to feel like you were in this environment. I wanted to invite you in and be like, this is, come to dinner, come to snacks, I should say, come, eat with me. And so the pieces in the book try to reflect that sort of, mixed up mishmash, okay to just be natural and not feel like it has to all be fussy and pristine. And you don't have to, I really do believe you don't have to go to, whether it's, Crate and Barrel or whatever, and buy everything new to have a lovely get together. I mean, I used one thing in the jars chapter I talk about is you don't have to go buy jars. You don't have to have matching wet jars. You can use I use the jam jars with the pretty little plaid top. Yeah. They sort of populate themselves in my cabinet all the time. We're constantly have hundreds of them around. Yeah. And I mean, they're very cute to put out. So I think that's part of what I wanted the book to reflect. Serve your wine out of a water glass if you want. It doesn't matter. It's more about the people you're with, frankly.
Yeah. And I think that sometimes when we spend time on social media and you see certain designs, sometimes it is maybe a little too new, a little too matchy. And this it's great. So I think that I love how you did it. And I think that the vibe that you set in the book with your experience of food styling and being the person that worked on the recipes, it was beautiful how you were able to bring all of that together.
Thank you.
Yeah. So one of the things I love to talk about on the show are I love routines and rituals, and something that you mentioned kind of in the book, and then I want to talk about it a little bit more, is your ritual of shower wine. And also the concept of enjoying a glass of wine in this day and time when everybody's seeming to want to pare things out of their diet, take things away, and what wine contributes to the Peckish story.
Yeah, I do talk about my internal battle with the wine thing these days, because all we keep hearing is no alcohol is the best alcohol, and I think we get ourselves tied up in knots over this idea of how much is too much. How come I have friends who aren't drinking anything, they're sober curious, they're proud when they don't drink, they're bummed when they do. And I sort of feel like, God, we just give this so much more thought than I think. It didn't used to be this hard, I feel like, and so one thing that I talk about is moderation, which is just, I'm tired of beating myself up over it. I think a glass of wine at the end of the day or two is totally fine. I think a cocktail, I think a beer, it's just, I know medicine will probably come at me for this, or science, but I just am not ready to give it up, and I'm not ready to say it's terrible for me. I do believe that it's a lovely part of life. I really think it's something nice. And sharing a bottle of wine with friends is just one of the nicest things. And so you referenced shower wine. In our house, it's kind of a ritual. It started years ago. I think someone came home from a very bad day, probably me. And my husband, Ken, said, when you come home from food styling, the first thing you want to do, by the way, is take a shower, because you are covered in something. And he said, go take a shower here, and stuck a half a glass of wine in my hand. And since then, shower wine is here's your half a glass, go upstairs, wash the day off, change get the remains of the day off you, and put on your soft, cozy clothes, and come back downstairs and let's have something to eat. And I think it's a really nice, look, people like to light candles. They like to it doesn't have to be every night, but there is something about this idea that, again, going back to solitude, when we talked about eating by yourself, there is something about a glass of wine, washing the day off you by yourself, just for a few moments, to just sort of be mindful, that I find very, very satisfying. And I think it's a nice tradition, and I'm sure I will get somebody saying I'm wrong.
Well, people can agree or disagree, but when you're a cook, and when we're working on cookbook projects, and when you're a stylist and you're working on food projects, there is no doubt that you have to wash the day off of you at the end of the day. Because if you're in the middle of a photo shoot, or you're in the middle of a big day of recipe development, it's work. And it's a day of work in the kitchen, on your feet, and you just want to clean up and change your clothes. Like you said, put on something comfortable. I 100% agree with all of that. And then the funny thing is that you still probably need to nourish yourself. You still want to spend time with your family, with your husband, with the same thing when Warren would come home. I'd want to do that. And I think wine and food have historically gone together for a reason.
I agree.
There's just no doubt in my mind. And I love what you said. We beat ourselves up about it. We feel proud of ourselves when we don't drink, and we feel bummed when people feel bummed when they do. But you're right about the internal chatter, and I don't know what it is. I'm not really sure. I think everybody probably knows their own limits, but I just love the concept of a glass of wine with food.
I do too. And I will say, as someone who comes home routinely and has to wash the hummus out of their hair or whatever happens during the day.
No, right.
That plus, what we've been talking about, these different snacking ideas, these jars and bowls and different things, they're kind of perfect. And they are one way to make that evening meal really easy.
Make it really easy. No, that's right. No, it does make it really easy. 100%. Because then if you know it's going to be a day when you're on your feet and you're in the kitchen, these kinds of meals work absolutely perfectly. They work perfectly for me now that my adult children have all flown the nest. Warren's traveling for work. I'm like, oh, this is like perfect. It's just like it's the exact thing I want to do at night. I would probably choose to do that and just be here by myself rather than even necessarily making plans to go out with friends. And I just love it.
Well, I'm glad you have the
Love it.
book now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I am too. I'm glad I have it also. And so the picture of there's a photo. It looks like it's set in a bathroom. Bathroom
That's my
sink. There's a
bathroom.
candle. There's a towel hanging on the wall, and then there's this little. It's a little like one of those little French water glasses filled with a little bit of red wine, and so the shower wine, um, and the discussion about wine is in there too. You know, I was just talking to one of my students earlier this morning about our internal chatter and the way Maggie talks to Maggie, the way that Suzanne talks to Suzanne. Isn't that a fascinating topic?
It's a completely fascinating topic. It's I guess one could say if I didn't know Maggie talked to Maggie that much too, I think Suzanne might just be a little crazy because she talks to
No.
herself a
Well, I
lot.
think
But
we
it
all
is,
do, but I don't think we always realize that we're doing it.
I do, and I think food and wine, honestly, are two of the topics. And I'm not going to make it gender specific at all, but I think they're two of the topics that we do it to ourselves a lot. I think there's a lot of how much is of this, too much of that. I shouldn't have done this. I should, should I do? And it is interesting. I don't know if it's I don't think it's always healthy for
No,
sure.
I don't think it's healthy either, because I think that the way Maggie talks to Maggie and the way Suzanne talks to Suzanne forms the foundation of the experience of our life. And until I really realized that, I was always like, sometimes things just felt a little off, but I'm like, why does this feel so weird? Like I'm, maybe sitting here enjoying this. But then I'm like, that's always for me why it is.
Yeah, it's a fascinating
It is.
thing, I think.
It is. And so I think that ladies, and of course, if there's any gentlemen listening, you too, just pay attention to your internal chatter. Be nice to yourself. You're all wonderful people. And I think that's one thing about this podcast that I've always loved is we talk about such fun things. It's so nice to talk about food and cooking and different people writing cookbooks, sharing food, encouraging people to pursue their creative dreams, talking about recipe writing and editing. And it's meant to be enjoyed. And I know that I firmly believe that that's why wine was created. And so with that, I think everybody should dive into Peckish. Suzanne, it's a beautiful book, and I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed having you on the show today. I do have one last question I love to ask people as we're wrapping up about cookbooks. If you have a favorite cookbook that has influenced your life and what that book is.
I do. I mean, I have a lot. I'm sure you hear this all the time. I have a lot of favorite cookbooks. I have one that when you mentioned you were going to ask me that question, I immediately came to mind. It's the broken spine splattered one that everyone sort of proverbially talks about. Diana Henry's How to Eat a Peach is just a tome that I go back to for so many different reasons, time and time again. I mean, starting with the fact that the cover feels like a peach. So you open it and you're already just like smitten. But it is, to me, the perfect book in that not only there's this rich narrative thread that is in her stories where the food, for people who are familiar with Diane Henry, she's a phenomenal British cookbook author, but this one specifically is very personal to her. And so there are stories of where the recipes that she has are all come from personal experiences, travels and places and things. So the actual prose is breathtaking and transporting. The imagery, which, as we were talking about, really puts you in a place. Your her sense of place is so distinct in that book and so beautiful. The light, the shadows, the food. It's just breathtaking. And then the recipes themselves I have yet to have done anything out of her book that isn't just fantastic. So that one to me is the one I go back to all the time, sometimes literally just to curl up and flip through it and think, I just don't want to cook, but I really, really like looking at the pictures and reading about what she's eating. Yeah. So that would be my go-to.
That's wonderful. And so many of my listeners just love to read cookbooks. And so that's a beautiful one. How to Eat a Peach by Diana Henry. It's a beautiful book and something that everybody should check out a copy of, especially since you said the cover feels like a peach.
It's amazing. They somehow, her publishing team really did it. It's got a texture to it that is just, I've never seen on a cookbook before. So it's special.
That's fascinating. Very nice. Okay, very good. Well, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about how they can connect with you online?
Well, there's my website, which is SuzanneLenzer.com. And then I'm on Instagram relatively infrequently. I have to be honest. I'm not a huge social media person, but at SC Lenzer is my handle. And I love hearing from people. I just don't post as much as I sort of always intend to. I'm more of a watcher and a seer of other people than actually getting it together for me to post.
And I think we have internal chatter about that also.
We do. We have so much internal chatter about social media. That's part of why I am so kind of reluctant, I think. It just sometimes feels better to stay on the sidelines, but
exactly. Well, I wish you nothing but success with your book. I hope you enjoy all the things you're doing to enjoy it being here, talking about it, promoting it. And again, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much, Maggie. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for joining us today for this episode of the Cookbook Love Podcast. Again, all the links can be found in the show notes at www.cookbooklove.co. And if you are interested in writing a cookbook of your own, please check out the free cookbook writing masterclass called How to Get Paid to Write a Cookbook. It is designed specifically for food or nutrition experts, and you can check that out at www.cookbookwritersacademy.com/free. So that's it for today's episode of the Cookbook Love Podcast. This is your host, Maggie Green. And until next time, have a great day and keep loving your cookbooks.
Thanks for listening to the Cookbook Love Podcast. You can find out more information at www.cookbooklove.co.